Hello, I'm Brett Knowles from PM2 Consulting. This is a detailed walkthrough of the methodology we're proposing to help SCTH get a grip on their strategy and in particular strategy execution across internal SCTH departments, external ministries, and the private sector. I'll be walking you through a 5-step process. First, we need to capture the existing strategy and priorities. From there, we can add in the existing KPIs, the measures of success. Then we begin doing almost a lean analysis to make sure that the processes, whether they're SCH internal, external ministries, or the private sector, are lining up in support of the strategy and how well they're accomplishing their responsibilities. That allows us to determine where the biggest gaps are so that we can ensure our investments and further initiatives are focused for maximum impact. From there, we'll establish the ongoing governance process of reporting and feedback, and then finally turn on the tool. So, to begin walking through this, we've been in this space since the late 80s. We were involved in some of the initial research on the balanced scorecard at Harvard, and since then we've completed maybe 3,000 or 4,000 scorecards in almost every sector and around the world. This includes significant governmental organizations, a number of tourism departments and government entities, and a number of tourist sites and organizations. We don't pretend to be an expert in any of these areas. It's our job to bring the methodology and tool set, and we rely on the expertise of our clients to fill in the technology and specific gaps around those industries. For the case study I'm going to show you, we took a look at the existing vision and mission for SCTH on the website, and had the opportunity and access to a few of the recent presentations that have been prepared. Again, I want to emphasize that this is intended to be indicative of the sort of work we can do and indicates how we don't need to reinvent the wheel. SCTH has already invested in many of the resources we need. Now, we may or may not have identified the right ones or put them in the correct context, but you'll get the idea. So, to begin with, we're going to capture the existing strategy in what we call a strategy map. The strategy map tries to show the cause and effect relationship towards things that we do and success for SCTH. And ultimately, our goal at SCTH is to make our stakeholders happy. Now, those stakeholders are the citizens of Saudi Arabia, they're the different ministries, they are private stakeholders, they are tour providers, a very complex and diverse stakeholder environment. To do that, we need to set up the right internal processes, both within SCTH, the ministries, and the private sector. And to make that happen, we need the right enablers, the right culture, competencies, strategic assets. So if we go back to our source document, we're going to start off by understanding what the overall mission is. So I'm going to use the kingdom's tourism mission. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as a cradle of Islam, seeks a value-based, distinctive tourism development with the social, cultural, environmental, and economic benefits proceeding from the Islamic values, ancient heritage, and the authenticity of its famed hospitality. And we're just going to plunk that at the top of the strategy map. Now, I'm going to extract the core elements of the strategy from this vision and mission. I don't know if this is the most current version, but it's illustrative. So in here, it talks about things like we want to achieve through tourism and economic and socially enriching diversity. So that's an objective, achieve economic and socially enriched diversity. And that's something that it looks to me like the stakeholders want to achieve. So we'll move that up to stakeholders. It talks about generating employment for Saudi citizens. Again, that's something the stakeholders want. We'll put that up in stakeholders. It talks about maintaining environmental and cultural authenticity of the land. And that's actually an enabler. That's part of the underpinning foundation that this is all built on. So I'll put it down here in enablers. It talks about a participation between the public and private sectors, and so forth. So the idea is inside of this document are many gems of wisdom about the strategy. So I'm going to shift gears a bit in how I tell the story. As opposed to showing you my work, where I extracted the objectives from, instead I'm going to tell the rest of the story in terms of how it creates the overall strategy for SCTH. So as I looked across the mission, vision, values, and strategic direction, there's a fourth stakeholder objective, which is that we need to create a climate for tourism self-sufficiency. Now, those four seem to all aid in achieving the overall objective of facilitating successful and sustainable development of tourism industry in the kingdom. And so, for example, enabling active public and private sector participation is one of the things that we need to do. I'll draw an arrow to say if we do this, that will help contribute to this objective. We also need to achieve economic and socially enriched diversity. That'll contribute to it. Create a climate for tourism self-sufficiency. And then finally, generate employment for Saudi citizens. So these four strategic objectives, if we achieve them, will lead towards this overall goal. So how do we make that happen? Well, the internal processes have a lot of conversation about we're going to build this public-private sector partnerships. And we're doing that, it seems to me, largely to stimulate private sector investment. In fact, the private sector investment seems to fit into four categories that we're looking for. We need to help the private sector invest in development and infrastructure, invest in monuments and museums, market tourism in the kingdom, and lastly, upgrade the Saudi manpower for tourism jobs. So, how do we make this happen? Well, there's three main things. One is we have to provide motivation and schematic guidance. We need to provide the necessary infrastructure for tourism, and we need to provide clear direction for the industry. So again, we do these three strategic objectives to achieve building public and private sector partnerships. We're doing that in order to stimulate the investment, and this is the investment we're looking for. And then at the bottom, we talk about maintaining this environmental and cultural authenticity. There's a bunch of things we need to do to make that happen. We have to develop museums and architectural heritage items. We need to increase the knowledge about our heritage. We need to create cultural resources, and we need to enable the protection of monuments and museums. Now, this strategy map is not correct. It's a bit more complicated than I would like, but it does help you understand that within your existing strategy documents are the core objectives that we need to work towards. Now, the next step is these are not all equally important. Over time, different objectives are going to become most important as you work towards your strategy. So, a focus, higher weighting will go in one area for a chunk of time until we meet those requirements and move on to the next. It's almost like playing chess. So I've made up some weightings based on some of the readings I've done. And basically what I've done is put a percentage, these add up to 100%, on each of these objectives. And in my thinking, these are the core theme for now. In the near term, we need to provide the infrastructure. We need to provide clear direction for industry in order to help build those partnerships and stimulate investments. And we want to begin creating a climate for that tourism self-sufficiency and enable that private and public sector participation. Now, the weighting is not necessarily right. You need to come up with that weighting yourself, but some things are always more important than others. So that's the overall strategy. Then, of course, what we can do is add in performance indicators to help us see how we're working towards those objectives. Again, this isn't based on real data, but if it were, this is how we'd read this. Obviously, we're concerned about where we've got red. We're performing significantly behind target. But if we take a look at these, it looks like we're in this hypothesis, because we're not very good about providing clear direction for industry, this red is causing this one to turn yellow. building the private and public sector partnerships is not working because we don't have the direction. And based on that, we're not stimulating the private sector investment. And of all of these investments, the thing that we're most significantly behind is the private sector investing in the development and infrastructure. Now, the important thing is we can't make this better by putting pressure here. We actually have to sort of fly upstream and solve this problem first, and hopefully make this turn yellow then green. That'll make this turn from yellow to green, this from yellow to green, and fix this problem. So this allows us to begin seeing the cause and effect relationship towards strategic success. Now, it's important to note that we're just talking about the top of the house strategy map at this point, sort of the corporate map. But we could build a strategy map for, say, any one of the core processes inside of SCTH. For example, marketing. We could take a look at other partners. We could do a strategy map for any particular private sector player. In this example, Acme. We could also set a strategy map up if we wanted to around each initiative, because each initiative has its own strategy. So, for example, Adventure Tours. Or we could set up a strategy map for each ministry to clearly define what that ministry needs to contribute to our overall success. So if we had an objective, which we do, like stimulate private sector investment, we could understand what each entity needs to do to contribute to that. So in this example, maybe marketing needs to figure out how to promote the opportunities in the kingdom. Maybe Acme needs to begin developing some of those target sites. Maybe the initiative we have around creating an adventure tour needs to begin providing investment opportunities at those multiple locations or the infrastructure between them. And then finally, maybe the Ministry of the Interior needs to do something like get approval from UMRA. So we're only going to focus on the corporate map, but understand that we can cascade down into ever-increasing levels of detail. So the benefits of creating this high-level strategy map are as follows. First, across all partners, other ministries, private sector stakeholders, investors, and SCTH, we can have an agreement about the key strategic objectives. And I say this because if I take a look at some of the existing documents, there are literally hundreds of objectives included through the documents. Secondly, it's important that people understand the cause and effect relationship between these strategic objectives. I'm doing this in order to get that. And then finally, it allows us to have alignment on the strategic priorities for the defined period of time. So you might have a waiting for this year, maybe another waiting for 5 years out, another waiting for, say, 20 years out. But it allows us to make sure that we're on that right journey and we all agree on the priorities. So we can take that strategy map and use to begin organizing and understanding all the activities we do. So imagine this. Let's list those strategic objectives and weightings down the left side of a spreadsheet. And then across the top, we're going to list the core partners. So obviously there's a series of SCTH internal processes. We also have a number of ministries that we work with. So each of those ministries could have also a linkage to our success. And then finally, the private sector partners. So what we should be able to do is understand what is the impact of each of these processes, ministries, or partners on the success of each objective. And we'll end up with a sheet that looks like this. We call this an ontology. Think of the periodic table. The periodic table is an ontology and shows us the cause and effect relationship between, in this case, the strategy and the actions we do to be successful. The periodic table shows us between the periods, neutrons, electrons, and clusters of different groups of materials. Let's take a closer look at this ontology. So in this case, we've listed some of the objectives down the left, and we're looking at the first process, market research. And again, I'm not sure I have these scores right, but we get the idea. So what does product research impact have on facilitating successful and sustainable development? Not much. So I've left it blank. What's product research impact on enabling active public and private sector participation? Well, it's pretty significant. I'll give it a score of 3 out of 5, because if we don't have the research, we're not going to be able to get that private sector participation. And I continue down, you can see I gave it a 5, so product research is critical, 5 out of 5, for stimulating private sector investment. Now you can see these are different colors. They're colored based on the strategy points available. So for example, here, this cell represents an impact of 3 times a weighting of 10, or 30 points. This one is also 3 times 10, 30 points. This one is 5 times 15, or 75 points. So the idea is we can actually assign points to how important these activities are. So if I ran product research, it's easy for me to figure out what I'm going to focus on first, what I'm going to focus on second, what's tied for third, and what's left for later. So this is a clear cascade from the strategy down to my process. It makes sure that my team is working on the things that are super critical to the success of the organization and not wasting time on the wrong things or focusing on the wrong things. So this ontology allows us to begin seeing a bunch of things as we manage the execution of our strategy. Specifically, it makes sure that all process owners inside of SCTH, other ministries, the private sector, and other stakeholders all know, first, how their activities enable success. Secondly, what are their critical deliveries? Where are those black squares? Third, what cross-functional or even cross-organizational teams need to exist and they participate in? So if you look in the background here, you can imagine that if for this strategic objective, I'm going to have a team that includes people from these 6 internal processes plus these 2 ministries. In other cases, I may have partnerships, which includes the private sector. And then finally, it makes sure that everyone is clear on their role and their responsibilities towards strategic success. The ontology. Now, we can actually take this ontology and add in KPIs. Now, for most of our clients, what we do is we first target off KPIs for where the black cells are. And once we have all of those key performance indicators, we hit up the dark grays and then later on the light grays. So that begins to look a bit like this. Now, again, I know you have the data. In some of the reports we've seen, it lists off the various SLAs that you have in place. These are, in fact, are the KPIs for some of these specific spots. So what we're looking at here now is the performance in strategic context. What do I mean by that? Well, here you can see that we've got 3 processes, all of which have an impact of 5, and all currently are scored with a performance level of 2 out of 5. Yet this one's red, this one's yellow, and this one's green. Why would that be? Well, because when we look at it in strategic context, this objective is worth 15%. It's the single most important thing this year. And for that, a performance of 2 is not good enough. This strategic objective has a weighting of 5. So a weighting of 2 gives you a yellow, behind target, but we can manage it. And here, because it's so unimportant, just a weighting of 2, a performance of 2 is fine. That's green. In other words, the performance level has to be seen in light of the strategic context. In this way, we can make sure that people are chasing down the things that are most critical to success as opposed to the things which are performing worse in their little area. So this allows, again, all the process owners, other ministries in the private sectors to understand where their individual gaps are. So if I owned this process, I know exactly where I need to focus. If I'm running this ministry, I can see where I'm letting tourism down. Secondly, it allows us to figure out, again, which cross-functional team I need to get together based on the performance that we're seeing, and which ones are in fact dragging the performance down. So as senior leadership team is looking for support from these other departments or the private sector, it becomes clear where the departments are failing in our success and therefore where we need to exert pressure. Finally, it allows leadership to see what part of their strategy is at risk if I look at this horizontally. In fact, because this is just a table of numbers, we can do that. We can add it up horizontally to give you a chart like this. Now, again, remember, this is made up data, but if this were the case, what we can see is for this stimulate private sector investment, the height of this bar represents the amount of process support we need to be successful. The blue part represents how well we're currently performing. So the gold, again, is the gap between current performance and what the strategy requires. So in this world, it's pretty easy for us to figure out where we need to focus our process improvement, right? Would we focus it here or here? Obviously here, because the gap is so big. And even though this is made up data, this is indicative of most of our clients. It's order of magnitude gaps in the performance of our processes against achieving our strategic goals. So for the next little while, we're just going to focus on the goal parts. The blue parts are how we're currently performing. Don't need to worry about it. So this analysis allows, again, process owners, ministries, and the private sector's partners to know exactly where the performance is cross-functionally. Secondly, it also allows us to create alignment around where that improvement needs to occur. So we don't have conflict about which is the next initiative we should be doing or why we're doing that initiative before some other initiative. So this gets into the whole sequencing as well as prioritizing. So obviously our focus needs to be on these gold bars. So I'll just ignore the blue part, how we're currently performing, as we go through the next step. Now, we can also take a look at this by process. So here are the same processes, and think of looking at that spreadsheet by adding it up by column. And again, we can see which processes have the largest gaps, whether those are inside of SCTH or from our supporting ministries or from the private sector or investors. So how do we fix them? Well, we launch initiatives. And so these are some of the initiatives that we had from the slide deck. And each of these initiatives are going to consume some resources and offer some gap closing potential against those strategic objectives. So now we can score these initiatives. Think of this as almost part of the project or initiative chartering process, because each of these jobs, these projects are supposed to have the job of closing that gap. So imagine that we also added this up horizontally and we scored those as dots. So what you see here, for example, is there's a lot of projects in this portfolio, if I add it up across all the projects, supporting marketing tourism in the kingdom. But there aren't many projects around, say, the public-private sector partnership. Now, again, these projects are being done in aid of closing these gold bars that we saw before. So what if we overlay these two charts on each other? Now, it's a two-axis chart, so I'm worried about the relative heights, but this is what we see all the time. In some cases, we have way over-investing on particular areas. In other cases, significantly under-investing, a misalignment of our projects. In fact, in the typical public sector environment, over 66% of the project budget is spent on the wrong things. So what we want to do is throttle back on some of these projects and reallocate those resources in other places where they could be of greater value. So this is how we make sure we have the right initiatives going forward, delivering the right benefits at the right point in time. That is how we bring these things together. And this last step allows the process owners, other ministries, and the private sector partners to understand, the alignment or misalignment of project spending versus strategic need. How to better optimize the allocation of scarce resources, whether that's money or manpower or leadership time. And finally, how to charter those projects more effectively and how to monitor those projects more effectively so we can make sure the PMO is doing the right thing. So again, in summary, there are 5 steps we need to go through. One is capture the existing strategy, strategic priorities, and cause and effect relationship. Secondly, add in those overall KPIs so we can see how the overall organization, ministries, and private sector are performing. We then need to do the ontology, analyze how well the activities we do are working towards supporting our strategic objectives. And from there, we can identify what gaps we need to work on and make sure that the project portfolio we have is aligned to those gaps. Now, these are powerful tools. We need to build a governance process to enable that to occur. And then finally, we have to turn it on. Now, this is not a long process. We're expecting, based on our conversations with SCTH so far, that probably in a fortnight we can get this up and operational. Now, it'll need improvement over time, but you have done so much groundwork over the last years, we can just harvest all that knowledge, capture it in these tools, and be able to give you this managerial tool very quickly. What that means is basically by the end of the first week, you can begin prioritizing your projects and getting rid of those which are off strategy and emphasizing those which are giving you better traction. So, I hope this has been informative to you. I know it's been a long conversation, but hopefully this allows you to see how easy it is to take advantage of the work you've done to achieve strategic execution at SCTH.